Tonight, the UN's top court says a genocide case against Israel will go forward, but there's no ceasefire in Gaza.
On the political level, let's say it was a tie. On the moral level, we lost.
What the decision means in Canada. 6 months until the Summer Olympics, the mounting challenges in Paris.
As they've grown to the gigantic size that they are, there has been a larger and larger disconnect.
Charges against Kenneth Law upgraded to first-degree murder.
There may not have been a case exactly like this.
We'll break down what we know about a notorious online forum.
This is The National with Ian Hannamansing.
A historic day in The Hague, the World Court ruling on accusations of genocide made against the country that emerged from the Holocaust. Now, as Israel wages war in Gaza, it faces a court order to do everything it can to prevent genocide, but not an order to stop fighting. 3 months of that has plunged Gaza into crisis, and today thousands more fled Khan Yunis, forced into an ever smaller section of the territory. Food is scarce, illness is rampant, and safety is in question. Today's ruling is legally binding, but just a first step. The court could take years to decide on South Africa's allegation that Israel committed genocide. Chris Brown has reaction from Jerusalem.
In The Hague, Israel had wanted what it called the absurd genocide case dismissed, while South Africa's lawyers demanded the court effectively order a ceasefire in Gaza. The 15 judges did neither. They ruled that some of Israel's acts in Gaza could plausibly amount to genocide, but did not tell it to halt the war. Instead, the court said Israel must take actions to improve the humanitarian situation and to prevent acts of genocide.
The court further considers that Israel must ensure with immediate effect that its military forces do not commit any of the aforementioned acts.
Outside, Palestinian officials seem to interpret that as a win.
This is a good day for humanity. This ruling is in favor of international system based on law and against exceptionalism and double standards.
In Gaza, though, where health officials say 26,000 are now dead and some 250 people are killed every day, there was disappointment. Immediately, there should have been a ceasefire, Ayad Saeed told a videographer working for CBC News, and then they can start investigating and see what's really happening here. Everyone is expecting that Israel won't follow through with this ruling, said Omar al-Saka. Since when has Israel followed through with any ruling from the UN?
It's outrageous.
Israeli officials lashed out over the fact the genocide accusation still hangs over the country.
Today, the UN has become one of the weapons in the arsenal of modern-day Nazis against us.
A statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu didn't specify whether Israel intends to follow the court's orders.
Israel's commitment to international law is unwavering. Equally unwavering is our sacred commitment to continue to defend our country and defend our people.
In Jerusalem, where support for the war remains strong, some felt this ruling won't change much.
And there's genocide going all around the world that everybody's ignoring. The international community is only focusing on Israel, and Israel is the only country that's not committing genocide. They're protecting themselves.
On the political level, let's say it was a tie. On the moral level, we lost.
Alon Liel is a former Israeli ambassador to South Africa.
Look at our television. I'm sure tomorrow people will not speak about it anymore. It will be a tendency to shelve it somewhere and forget about it. But they said, for instance, that they are waiting for a report in a month. Let's see if the court convenes in a month and checks the data on a month.
And Chris, you've been tracking some of the international reaction.
Well, Israel's most important ally, the United States, has said that this court ruling is consistent with its view that Israel has the right to use force in response to Hamas, but also has to minimize civilian casualties. Still, This ruling could cause problems for Israel, maybe by increasing diplomatic isolation or fueling calls for boycotts or embargoes. In the meantime, the White House is sounding a bit more positive about a possible pause in the fighting and a deal to return hostages from Gaza and a release of Palestinian prisoners. It's not imminent, Ian, but looking better.
Chris Brown in Jerusalem. The decision was also being watched very closely here in Canada. Rafi Boudjikanian brings us reaction from all sides.
Since last October, demonstrations and vigils in Canada have echoed the divisions in the Middle East. Now, reaction is also split to the International Court of Justice's ruling on Israel's conduct in Gaza.
While we are disappointed in the fact that the ICJ didn't call for an immediate ceasefire, we really welcome the court's decision, the court's ruling insofar as it said that Israel is not doing enough to prevent a genocide in Gaza.
The Canadian government needs to be outspoken in the fact that it has no concerns that the Israeli government is committing genocide in its defensive action in the Gaza Strip.
What will Canada do to abide by the ICJ ruling for this?
The Prime Minister let his MPs do the talking. They shared different perspectives.
Today, the court did not take a position on whether or not Israel is committing genocide. My position has been that Israel is not committing genocide, that it's baseless and it's insulting.
I'm a bit disappointed that they didn't ask for an immediate ceasefire. Canada is a signatory to ICJ. I think it's incumbent on Canada to convince Israel to make sure that they follow what has been said.
The current ruling legally binds all ICJ signatories to help enforce it however they can. And some experts say Canada needs to be thinking about the future.
The International Court of Justice may determine in a year or a couple from now that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. And if it does so, that may quite clearly implicate Canada because Canada is selling military weapons and technology to the Israeli military.
Global Affairs Canada has not answered questions about Canada's current military aid to Israel. It amounted to $21 million 2 years ago. In a statement on the ruling itself, the department reiterated its support for the court, though said that does not mean it accepts the premise of the case brought by South Africa. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
Later in the hour, we'll go deeper into the ICJ ruling with two experts on international law and human rights. That's coming up in the breakdown. Canada is joining the U.S. tonight in pausing funding to a UN aid agency in Gaza. Several workers there have been fired, and this comes after information supplied by Israel that they were involved in the October 7th attack by Hamas. Richard Madden now on the swift reaction.
In war-torn Gaza, UNRWA, the UN's relief and works agency, is one of the largest providers of life-saving aid to Palestinians. But now, shocking revelations from the agency itself. Its Commissioner General confirming several UNRWA workers were fired, accused by Israel of being involved in the October 7th attacks.
The Secretary General is horrified by this news. We need to investigate this matter swiftly.
Israel has long accused UNRWA of fueling anti-Semitism, something the agency denies. But its quick response to these latest claims signals these accusations are serious, threatening not only the credibility of the agency, but the UN itself.
It was exposed that UNRWA employees took part in the massacre. The UN is not only weaponized to delegitimize our existence, but also to physically exterminate us.
This announcement comes hours after the UN's top court ordered Israel to take measures to prevent acts of genocide in Gaza. In response, the U.S. State Department is halting funding to UNRWA, and the White House is demanding the UN conduct a thorough and transparent investigation.
I think it's about a dozen employees were assisting Hamas, and even to the point of maybe even involved in hostage taking, then absolutely they need to be held to account.
Canada also announced it too has temporarily paused any additional funding to UNRWA going forward.
The services that agency provides are absolutely important, not only for Palestinians, but for ultimately Israeli security and regional security.
If UNRWA's funding gets paused, cut, eliminated, how will these important supplies get to the people of Gaza who need it?
That is part of the challenge.
And early next week, 2 Republican-led congressional committees will hold public hearings on the agency, focusing on its mandate, its funding, and its failures.
Richard Madden, CBC News, Washington.
Donald Trump has been ordered to pay more than $83 million in damages to former journalist E. Jean Caroll. This for defaming her in 2019 after she accused him of a past sexual assault. That is Caroll moments after learning her payout would be more than 8 times what she initially sued for. The jury took less than 3 hours to reach a decision. On social media, Trump said he would appeal, calling the case a Biden-directed witch hunt. The founder of World Wrestling Entertainment is stepping down. In a statement to CBC News, Vince McMahon said he's resigning as executive chairman of TKO Group, the parent company of WWE. The move comes a day after McMahon was named in a lawsuit by a former WWE employee with allegations of sexual abuse and trafficking. McMahon calls them baseless, and he says he'll vigorously defend himself. An emotional appeal from a BC family tonight, encouraging young people to ask for help when they're in vulnerable situations online. Their 12-year-old son, who died last year, was the victim of sextortion. As Mira Bain shows, the plea comes as BC's government tries to do something about it.
We're going to try and get through this, guys.
A courageous moment for the parents of Carson Cleland, speaking out to warn others. He died in hospital after attempting suicide last October. He had shared intimate images online with someone posing as a girl his age.
We held him in our arms until he took his last breath and passed away. We stand here today as 2 broken parents, trying to do everything to make sure this doesn't happen to another family, to another child, to another person.
Carson had been threatened by internet predators who demanded gift cards and money.
And if he didn't give them, they were going to share his pictures with anybody on his friends list. Carson panicked.
Ryan Cleland spoke as the BC government prepares to roll out its Intimate Images Protection Act. People who have their intimate images posted online without their approval can go through a civil tribunal to have them taken down.
We have the ability to block the distribution of this image. We have the ability to force that image to come down. If someone's threatening to send pictures of you around that you don't want sent around, we can stop that. There is a tool available.
Under the Act, companies used to spread intimate images can be fined and victims can seek compensation. Minors can also make applications without an adult to have their images removed. But challenges remain.
How do you go after them? So if they're in Turkey or Iceland or wherever, they're not subject to being held in front of court here in Canada.
The message from Carson's parents is simple. Ask for help.
Tell a parent, tell a friend, call the RCMP, reach out.
BC wants to limit cell phone use during class time in schools next fall and bring in new legislation taking aim at social media platforms with addictive algorithms which pose safety risks to kids. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
An update now to a story we brought you last night on The National. CBC News has learned that all murder charges against Kenneth Law, the man accused of selling poison online, have been upgraded to first degree. Thomas Dagla has the reaction.
Maria Lopez takes strength from her necklace with a picture of her beloved only child. Jasenia Bedoya Lopez from Aurora, Ontario, died in September 2022. Only 18 years old, a recent high school grad, now listed as one of the 14 alleged murder victims of Kenneth Law.
Para mí, mi hija fue además de mi amiga, mi confidente.
To me, my daughter was, in addition to being my friend, my confidant. She was everything.
Instead of feeling better, every day we feel worse.
CBC News has learned authorities are upgrading all of Law's murder charges. On top of 14 counts of counseling or aiding suicide, he'll now also face 14 counts of first-degree murder, meaning the Crown has to prove they were planned and deliberate.
It's going to be quite the legal minefield to get through.
Investigators allege Law operated websites selling a toxic salt and other items meant for self-harm. Stephen Mitchell Jr. died last March. His father says, "We believe the latest upgrade to the charges against Mr. Law matched the crimes that he committed. Law sent packages around the world, from the U.S. to New Zealand, and those products are suspected of being connected to at least 124 deaths.
We have lots of case law on what is planned and deliberate murder. There may not have been a case exactly like this.
Britain's National Crime Agency is now reviewing 93 deaths in that country alone. As for Jasenia's parents,
I'm wondering what you hope comes of this, ultimately.
Yo personalmente espero que la persona...
Personally, I hope that the person who caused all this bears the full weight of the law.
And Thomas's trial could come sooner than expected.
This is now a direct indictment, Ian, meaning Crown attorneys don't have to prove to a judge that they have enough evidence for this to go to trial. There's no start date for that trial set yet, but Law's lawyer told me he will be pleading not guilty.
And later on the program, Thomas, you'll have more on this story.
Yeah, ahead we'll look at the online forum where many buyers first learned of Kenneth Law's products, and we'll explore why that infamous website is still up and running, Ian.
Thomas Dagler in Toronto. Thanks. And if you're in need of support, there's a 3-digit suicide crisis helpline. You can call or text 988. Help is available 24 hours a day. Police in Charlottetown say they've solved a cold case that gripped PEI 35 years ago. They say advances in DNA analysis and genealogy technology led to a first-degree murder charge in the death of Byron Carr.
We said a long time ago that we had DNA from the crime scene. Through that, we were able to identify Todd Joseph Gland.
Carr was 36 when he was killed in his home in 1988. Police say they're looking into possible motives and whether anyone else was involved. There's new research tonight looking at Alberta's oil sands and the dangerous pollution being emitted.
We know they cause everything from cardiovascular events, so heart attacks, strokes, arrhythmias.
The threat to people's health next. Plus, the Paris Olympics are just 6 months away, but is the city ready? The race to clean up the Seine. And later, a pet with a lot to say.
No.
How this dog learned more than 100 words. We're back in 2. Alaska Airlines has put a Boeing MAX 9 back in service about 3 weeks after the entire fleet was grounded. The trip from Seattle to San Diego is the first for this model since a large door plug was ripped from one aircraft on January 5th. The Federal Aviation Administration says it's only allowing planes back in the air after rigorous inspection. Construction of an electric vehicle battery plant near Montreal got a green light today from a court, an environmental group arguing that the construction put species at risk, among other failures, but the injunction request was denied.
We are concerned, of course, for the environmental impacts that this work will have in the short term. So we will continue to see what we can do.
The judge did say construction will be destructive, but he felt the company, Northvolt, took steps to make up for it by restoring other areas and planting trees. Scientists are highlighting a major pollution problem at Alberta's oil sands. New data shows harmful emissions are far more rampant than previously reported. Anand Ram now on toxic pollutants that have some doctors worried as well.
How oil sands operators report air pollutants uses estimates from the ground. But when scientists actually tested the air from above, the results were far worse.
Those emissions were substantially higher than what industry is reporting to inventories.
Pollutants 20 to 64 times higher, according to their research published in the journal Science.
They were also roughly equal to all of the organic carbon emissions summed up across the entire country.
What they found were a lot of volatile hydrocarbons, the kind you might see warnings about on paint thinners or nail polish remover. Highly reactive, they change as they mix with air and sunlight.
Ultimately, what that means is, though, that it forms tiny particles in the air, which the hydrocarbons are a health risk themselves, but the tiny particles are something we track a lot as being a health concern.
Tiny particles like those found in the wildfire smoke that blanketed cities last year. so small they can travel far and deep into lung tissue.
And we know they cause everything from cardiovascular events, so heart attacks, strokes, arrhythmias, as well as having an impact on mortality.
This research does not draw a connection from the emissions found to diseases in communities, but experts say finding such high amounts in any part of the country is important to understanding health impacts.
They are also present in our cities in unknown amounts. And the measurement technique they got and they've used in the Oilsands now is something that can be used, in Toronto.
We put the stark findings to both industry and the federal government. The group that represents the major oil sands companies says the difference in measurement is worth reviewing. Meanwhile, the Environment Ministry says it could lead to improvements on how emissions are tracked. Anand Ram, CBC News, Toronto.
A state funeral for former NDP leader Ed Broadbent will be held on Sunday. Chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton will host special coverage.
The NDP's longest-serving leader, Ed Broadbent, brought his party to new heights and spent a lifetime fighting for his vision of a fairer Canada.
Well, what are you doing, Mr. Prime Minister, about organizing those unorganized workers?
It is a horror and a shame that we should put an end to.
Join us for special coverage of a rare honor for an opposition leader, the state funeral for Ed Broadbent this Sunday afternoon on CBC TV and News Network. Gem and explore starting at 3 p.m. Eastern.
6 months before the Olympic Games begin in Paris, concern about where preparations stand.
As they've grown to the gigantic size that they are, there has been a larger and larger disconnect.
Will the polluted Seine River be ready for swimmers? Plus, the UN's highest court orders Israel to prevent genocide, but not a ceasefire.
This is a good day for humanity.
Our panel breaks down the historic and controversial ruling. And the online suicide forum used by an accused murderer in Canada.
There is no reason why anybody should ever end up on a site like that.
Why it's still up and running. The National breaks down the story shaping our world. Next. Six months out from hosting the world at the Summer Games, Paris has an Olympian challenge. The Seine River is very dirty, poor water quality, possibly even high levels of E. coli, and swimmers are supposed to compete in it. Sasha Petrusik now on a race to the starting blocks.
Hi. Hi. Only brave souls dive into the Seine these days. Yes, it's cold, but also a cocktail of contaminants. Has been for a century. And many pine for the days when France frolicked here, before swimming was declared too dangerous in 1923.
C'est vraiment un rêve qu'on va réaliser.
The dream is back, say swimmers, more real and more urgent because of the Paris Olympics. Just 6 months away. The grand opening will be here, the first ever outside a stadium, with a flotilla of athletes riding to the heart of Paris. But it's the scheduled swimming events causing stress in a river deemed too polluted for a test run even last summer, one where raw sewage and industrial runoff still trickle in today. The rush is on to build huge underground reservoirs to capture untreated waste. There is no plan B, says Paris's deputy mayor, Pierre Rabadan. It will be done for the Games.
Merci beaucoup.
That optimism runs to the top.
Ce sera un formidable moment de fierté française et de célébration.
It will be a tremendous moment of French pride and celebration, says President Emmanuel Macron. France has also promised to make these the People's Games, connecting the Olympic movement with the public by bringing it to them.
As they've grown to the gigantic size that they are, there has been a larger and larger disconnect.
Angela Schneider is an Olympic silver medalist in rowing.
And if you lose that connection, you've lost the purpose for the Games. It's fundamentally, I think, important for people to be able to see themselves.
But there has been discord, protests by police officers saying they will block airports during the Games if their demands for better working conditions at the Olympics aren't met. Embarrassments, too, as the Paris Organizing Committee was accused of embezzlement and raided by police. The biggest disappointment so far lies in one of the poorest suburbs of Paris, where dozens of abandoned buildings occupied by thousands of homeless people have been cleared to make way for a sparkling new athletes' village. I asked for emergency housing, social assistance, he says. No response. They ignore us. But there is no sign Paris will ignore these games, a city where the celebrations have already started. Sasha Petrusek, CBC News, Toronto.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the news shaping our world. Kenneth Law, now accused of first-degree murder, a forum some believe connected him with victims, still online.
It's just horrifying to us.
But first, the case accusing Israel of genocide moves ahead.
The charge of genocide is not only false, it's outrageous.
The Hague imposes conditions.
We are satisfied.
But what will it mean for Israel, the war, and the people of Gaza? This is The Breakdown. Lots of perspectives on this, and we want to hear from two Canadian experts in international law. Artie Imses is a former UN war crimes investigator and professor of international law at Queen's University in Kingston. He joins us from Montreal. And Sarah teaches in Toronto. She's an international human rights lawyer and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Artie, let me start with you. Did the ICJ get this right?
I think they did, Ian, yes. Since the events of October have kicked off, you've got 26,000 people that are killed in the Gaza Strip, 1.7 million forcibly transferred. Starvation as a tool of war is being used against these people, indiscriminate bombardment, and all of that coupled with statements of intent to destroy in whole or in part members of an ethnic group, etc., by the high command of Israel, the prime minister, the defense minister, and so on. And so the court today issued a provisional measures order indicating that genocide in Gaza is plausible and that Israel has an obligation to cease its genocide of the Palestinian people. I think they got it right.
Sarah, I know this is a big question, but take at least part of it in perspective here. Was this the right decision?
I think in terms of the, when we're talking about the plausibility of genocide, I would say that they got it wrong, or at least the majority did. And if you look at the dissenting opinion of Justice Sebudente, and as well as the declaration of Justice Nolt out of Germany, and the Israeli judgment as well from Aharon Barak, I think those judgments more so got it right in terms of the plausibility. And I think what's specifically missing here is the specific element of intent. I think that we simply don't have enough in terms of evidence showing that specific element of intent, and some of those judges really went through it quite well in terms of looking at the specific statements that were used by South Africa and sort of putting those into the proper context, and looking at the dozens of clarifying statements that have come out of those same offices saying that Israel is complying with the laws of war.
So this is a court that has perhaps a lot of moral influence, at least with some, but no sort of enforcement power. Sarah, what do you think will change? Will anything change based on today's decision?
Well, I mean, importantly, the court ordered that Israel report back in a month as to how it's doing with the order. So that will probably be the most immediate next step. Perhaps we'll see a resolution tabled at the United Nations General Assembly or Security Council about this. And I think critically, if you look at the actual points that the court ordered, a lot of those points from Israel's public statements are things that they're not opposed to in principle. So abiding by the Genocide Convention, ensuring that their troops don't commit genocide, preventing and punishing incitement, these are all things that the Israeli government has already said that it will do. So probably they'll report back on those steps, and then maybe after that, yes, a resolution of some sort.
Artie, what do you think will change or ought to change now?
Well, it strikes me as odd that Sarah would suggest that the Israelis would be content for having to report to the court on measures they're taking to abide by their obligations under the Genocide Convention. Their position was very clear. It's a matter of public record. They wanted this case to be struck from the record and struck altogether. And now they have a provisional measures order against them by the court indicating that they are plausibly engaged in genocide in the Gaza Strip. Not a happy place to be if you're the Israelis. The big takeaway, of course, is that to the extent that the court has now indicated that genocide is plausibly happening in Gaza, that means third states like Canada, the United States are under a specific positive obligation to ensure that they don't, that they're not complicit in genocide, that they don't provide Israel with arms, diplomatic support, and other such support. Otherwise, they may be viewed by the court eventually to be aiding or abetting genocide in the Gaza Strip.
And Sarah, let me pick up on that point in terms of Canada's reaction. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mélanie Joly, did issue a statement a few hours ago saying that Canada supports the ICJ, but doesn't support the premise of the case brought by South Africa. And it doesn't address this question. Do you feel this interim ruling places any kind of duty or obligation on Canada to take some sort of action now?
No, I don't. And in fact, I think that Minister Joly's response was spot on. It's worth repeating that we don't have a ruling on the merits of the case yet. We also don't have a ruling on jurisdiction or admissibility. All of those are still to come. This was really just a provisional measures request, provisional measures ruling. So we don't have any answer on whether or not there's been actually breaches of the Genocide Convention. And provisional measures are really just ordered to protect rights that may or may not be held pending a final determination by the court of Palestinians. So I don't think we can go quite that far. And in terms of Canada's obligations under the Genocide Convention, obligations to prevent, this is a really important topic. Critically, these obligations come into play when there's a serious risk of genocide. So all the court's decided today is that there's a plausible risk of genocide. I don't think plausible equals serious risk. I mean, I'm not sure if there's specific jurisprudence on that discrete point, but I really don't think we're there yet.
Artie, let me ask you that. Do you think Canada does have an obligation even with this interim ruling?
The jurisprudence of the International Court of Justice is clear. A substantial risk amounts to a plausible case of genocide. They're the same thing. And Canada obviously now is on notice that there is a plausible case of genocide, a substantial risk that genocide is taking place in the Gaza Strip, and is under a positive obligation to prevent it. That means it needs to adjust its position in respect of Israel's position in Gaza. Otherwise, it may be complicit with genocide unfolding in the Gaza Strip.
I know these issues are complex, and they are for many people emotional, and I appreciate you giving your analysis, especially in the limited time we have. Artie Imsace and Sarah Teach, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, a Canadian man is now facing first-degree murder charges in connection to 14 deaths across Ontario.
If that suicide forum didn't exist, he'd still be with us today.
The online platform that may have connected him to his alleged victims. That's next on The Breakdown.
There's different tabs that were opened up on his phone.
Support for suicide available to those who seek it online.
They were all that site.
If that suicide forum didn't exist, he'd still be with us today.
In 14 cases, Kenneth Law has been arrested and charged, but an internet community of vulnerable people is still out there. Recently, Thomas Dagler looked into that online forum. It's raising alarm among mental health experts and those who have lost loved ones.
At home and in secret, vulnerable people are logging on to a website and finding ways to die. Often they're even encouraged to do it.
I'd say you shouldn't be all too paranoid about things going wrong.
I understand why you'd feel comforted by having a plan to leave this existence. I wish you the best.
Users call it a pro-choice forum, as in a place to openly discuss suicide. But we've uncovered evidence, including Canadian coroners' reports, linking multiple deaths to that site or others like it. And federal officials have resisted calls to have it banned.
It's just horrifying to us.
For years, families around the world have been warning about the dangers of this website. We've come to New York to meet with one mom who's fighting to get it shut down. When they learn about this site, how do people react?
Like, how is that allowed?
Kelly Wilson lost her son to suicide in April 2020. She found his body, then found a trail leading back to that online forum.
There was different tabs that were opened up on his phone. They were all that site. I went to go look at what was going on that website and couldn't believe it.
My phone. Don't you think this is like a problem? Mom, no.
Kelly's son, Junior, had just turned 18 when his life was cut short.
He loved his family very much, and he liked to research things. He was just like the best son ever.
She leads an online campaign to have the site blocked, exposing her to social media harassment from the forum's users.
It hurts the most whenever they bring my son into it, you know? Like the other day, one of them said that my son was in hell and I'm gonna be next to him soon.
What keeps you going?
Knowing that I'm doing something for my son. Knowing that, like, there is no reason why anybody should ever end up on a site like that.
The forum is anonymous and receives some 10 million page views a month. CBC News is choosing not to name the site to avoid promoting it. It's registered in the US and access is restricted in Australia, Germany, and Italy. In the UK, major internet service providers like British Telecom recently blocked access to the suicide forum, prompting more calls in Canada for similar action. The Canadian Mental Health Association and its Ontario CEO, Camille Kenville, accuse Ottawa of being too slow to act.
Individuals who would look for that kind of information are in their most vulnerable state.
Just today, someone posted, I have to make a choice between these methods. If I have to choose one, what would you choose? In another case, in response to another post, someone said, I wish you the best of luck in your plans. When you hear about people posting like this publicly, what goes through your mind?
I think if that isn't compelling enough for the federal government to act, I don't know what could be.
Two separate Quebec coroner's reports we obtained from 2021 and 2022 both recommended the CRTC take steps to restrict access to such sites. Mental health organizations sent a joint letter to the federal government last June urging Ottawa to block what it described as a dedicated suicide promotion website, a move prompted by high-profile criminal charges in Ontario.
We offer our sincerest condolences to the loved ones of those we have lost due to these unimaginable set of circumstances.
A former cook at a Toronto hotel, Kenneth Law is charged with murder and abetting suicide in connection with 14 deaths in Ontario. Investigators allege Law sold a potentially lethal substance online to clients around the world. And families suspect many of those clients were sent to him straight from that suicide forum. Noelle Ramirez's father says she laid out her plans online the night she died.
She ran into a person who was more than willing to coach her through this and then in turn sell her the product.
Tom Parfit's body was found next to a package linked to Kenneth Law.
I do know if that suicide forum didn't exist, he'd still be with us today, and I'm sure he'd be recovering.
Law's alleged victims in Ontario include 21-year-old Stephen Mitchell Jr. and 19-year-old Ashton Prosser, who died within 5 days of each other last March. Inspector Simon James with York Regional Police is leading the investigation.
Has anyone else come up in this investigation, or is Kenneth Law the only person you are investigating?
Well, we're looking at the investigation from a very broad scope, but I can't get into any specific details at this time because it's still very active.
Back in New York, Kelly Wilson is fighting for change in her country.
If this were shut down tomorrow, what would be the immediate effect, do you think?
I think it would save lives.
In homes around the world, people at risk are seeking out that site. Many need help. and they're finding quite the opposite.
And a reminder, support is available, a 3-digit suicide crisis helpline. You can call or text 988, and that help is available 24 hours a day. On Sunday, we'll have a feature interview with Canadian hockey star Sarah Nurse, but tonight, from her famous cousins to a Caribbean country, she stick handles around some unusual questions. Okay, I'm going to ask you 8 questions in 2 minutes. Are you ready for this?
Perfect.
Okay, first one. What's your second favorite sport?
Volleyball.
Oh, that was quick.
Yeah.
All right.
Sarah Nurse puts on the brakes, hits the trailer shot. Oh, what a stop! Rebound, score!
Where do you keep your Olympic gold medal?
I think it's in my sock drawer.
Like in this apartment? We could
Yeah.
actually go find it?
Yeah.
Okay, we won't, but I'm just curious if we could. There are a lot of professional sports teams in this city, as you know. What's going to be the next Toronto professional sports team to win its league championship?
I'm hoping women's hockey
Good
this
answer.
year.
There's no place I'd rather be playing than Toronto, the hockey capital of the world.
So your cousins, Kia and Darnell, are professional athletes. And so if you had to pick one sporting event that the 3 of you could compete in and you would win, what would it be?
Like, I want to say hockey.
How would Darnell feel about that?
I know, he wouldn't be very happy about that. Ooh, maybe something with swimming. Maybe like water polo or something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I haven't seen the 2 of them swim lately, so I'll try my odds.
What's your favorite Barbie?
The Tim Hortons hockey playing Barbie.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And remember, with Barbie, you can be anything.
Let's play word association.
Okay.
What comes to mind when I say Trinidad?
My family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Favorite food?
Roti.
Good answer. And finally this, 10 years from now, the PWHL will be?
Everywhere, globally. I think a leader and an innovator in the sport of hockey and the reason that this sport grows across the globe.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our more conventional conversation with Sarah Nurse is coming up on The National on Sunday. But coming up later tonight, a dog that has a lot to say and isn't afraid to speak her mind.
She kept looking down at the button, then back up at us, down at the button. I saw her lift her paw and then smash the outside button. I screamed and her head whipped up and her ears flew out and she looked so proud of herself.
The talkative canine is next in our moment. Well, this is a dog that has no trouble speaking up for herself. Now, you probably heard of dogs learning tricks like sit and roll over, but this canine has a way with words. Bunny is a 4-year-old sheepadoodle from Seattle, Washington, and she's become an internet sensation after learning how to communicate using buttons. Since mastering her first word, outside, she now has a vocabulary of 100 words, and tonight she makes our moment.
The first word that I gave Bunny was outside. Can you do outside? She was standing by the door, by the button. She kept looking down at the button, then back up at us, down at the button. I was watching her out of the corner of my eye. I saw her lift her paw and then smash the outside button. And I screamed. Yes. And her head whipped up and her ears flew out and she looked so proud of herself. And we went outside. We had a huge outside party. We know that dogs learn words. Ask anyone who has to spell walk for their dog. It seemed that if I were to press the button and say the word and then pair it with the action of going outside enough times, dogs are smart, she'd probably figure it out, and lo and behold, she did. Okay. I figured that if I could teach her 1 button, why not 5? If I could teach her 5, why not 10? Here we are today with over 100 buttons. No. It's not about teaching a dog to talk. It's about being able to hold a deeper understanding of what the animals that share our lives are thinking and feeling.
How many dog owners are going to spend how many hours this weekend with how many buttons to try to even come close to matching, what, 100 words there? And by the way, if you're wondering, and I may have mispronounced this, but she is 1/4 sheepdog and 3/4 poodle. That is the National for January 26th. I hope you join me Sunday for Cross Country Checkup on CBC Radio, and later that night, back here for the National. Have a great Saturday.